All right, so let's start with our first poem, Throwing a Tree. And as you can see, there are 4 stanzas. Who's going to start off with reading today? That was Hannah, Olivia Gann, Lambert, and Whitby first. Don't worry, there's plenty to read today. Let me just write down the names. So it's Hannah, Olivia Gann, Lambert, and then Wesley. And then the others can have a go with the next reading. All right, then, so off you go. Share the stanzas and let's have a nice smooth movement from one stanza to the next. Off we go then, please, Hannah.
The 2 excursioners.
That's executioners. That's executioners.
Executioners stalk along over the knolls, bearing 2 axes with heavy heads, shining and wide, and a limp 2-handed saw tooth for cutting great balls. They also approach the proud tree that bears and the dark mark on its side.
Yeah, the death mark on its side. Okay, on to you now, Olivia. You were next, Olivia again.
Doth they swing axes chop away just above ground, and the chips fly about and lie white on the moss and fallen leaves, till a broad deep gash in the bark is hewn all the way round, and one of them tries to hook upward a rope, which at last he achieves it.
Thank you, Lambert. Lambert, come along, please.
And a limp.
No, we are in the 3rd stanza, Lambert. You must know where you are. Please pay attention.
Okay. The sword then begins till the top of tall giant shivers. The shivers are seen to grow greater each cut than before. They edge out the sword, tug the rope, but the tree only quivers, and kneeling and sawing again, they step back to try pulling once more.
Thank you. And Wesley.
And lastly, the living mast sways, further sways with a shout. Job and Ike rush aside, reach the end of its long staying powers. The tree crashes downward. It shakes all its neighborhoods throughout. And 200 years, steady growth has been ended in less than 2 hours.
Okay, now this is a poem by the great English writer Thomas Hardy. He wrote poetry, but he was also very famous for writing great novels too. Many of his novels were set in the countryside, and they featured a bygone era. Does anyone know what that expression means, a bygone era? It means a past time. Are you taking down all the new words, everyone? It means time in the past. A bygone era meaning a way of life, really, that is no longer exists, because it features really a lifestyle before we were affected by the Industrial Revolution, the way machines began to change our whole lives. This is set where, do you think? Where is it set? The setting, the place of this poem, where would it be, do you think? Olivia Gann?
In a park or a street?
Well, certainly it's possible to be in a park. I wouldn't say it's in a street. If you look closely at the poem, there's nothing there that really suggests they could be near a street. You wanted to add to that, Wesley?
So it could have been in the forest?
Yes. Now, what makes you think that?
Because, like, it wouldn't really, in the park, there should be trees cut down everywhere, so they wouldn't be like all together. And then there it says shakes all its neighbors throughout. So it could have fallen, and then all the trees around it just went shaking, and also the animals living in it
Yes.
ran away.
Yes, it's very likely that this is in a forest or in a woods. And as I said before, because Thomas Hardy was really writing about life in the countryside, and in particular, he was showing us his sadness, you could say, over the changes in that lifestyle as we increasingly began to have an unpleasant impact upon nature. Now, I'm going to give you some words that mean a destructive influence. Here we are. Look at this word, deleterious. To have a deleterious impact on something or someone is to basically have a harmful influence. And as you well know, we are rather harmful in our treatment of nature, aren't we? We cause quite a lot of damage. And we now know probably where we are, a woods or a forest. Now, here's the simple next question. I bet you can answer this. What's the main action of this poem? The main action or activity of this poem? Is it, for example, a game of football? Is it buying ice cream? Well, of course not. So what is it, Hannah?
Cutting down trees.
Yes, it's cutting down a tree. And it's presenting us with the action of cutting down a tree. And what do you think the poet feels about that? What does he feel about it, do you think? Mary?
That, I think.
I agree. I think that we can say that he doesn't like this at all. Can anyone give me something from the poem that helps to suggest this attitude of the poet, that he is very unhappy about this tree being cut down? What do you think would be evidence of the poet's attitude? The speaker, the persona, we can use those words. In this case, it really also means the poet, because he was a man, as we well know, who wanted to preserve that harmonious and constructive, good relationship between man and nature. So what have we got? Wesley, what do you think?
So on basically the palm tree that bears the death mark on its side. Death mark.
Yes. Death mark is a very unpleasant phrase, isn't it? Death mark. I mean, I think most people, if they think about trees being cut down, they're not going to think terribly much about the idea of the tree being killed. They're not going to think about the word death connected to it. They're just probably going to think, oh, the tree was in the way, or the tree was rotting and maybe needed to be. They probably don't think about the idea that it's killing a tree. But what about the third word of the poem? Now, Holiday, what's the third word of the poem? Would you read it out for me? The third word of this poem. Can you see it there? It's in the first line, of course. Come on, so what's the third word, Holiday? Can you see it? Begins with the letter E. Can you read that word out? Well, we'll come back to you. Olivia Sue, you can read it.
Excursion.
Yes, the word is executioner. And what is that? Anyone know? Okay, Mary?
Means people like killings.
That's right. An executioner is somebody whose job is to kill somebody else because the government or the leader of the country has made it an order that this should happen. I mean, sometimes in this world, as you well know, people are still put to death for bad crimes, aren't they? You know, if someone does a terribly bad thing in some countries, they suffer the ultimate punishment, which is to be killed, to be executed. Now, can you execute a tree? Can you really execute a tree? Not really. You can only execute human beings, can't you? Right? Is that correct? All right. So what would you think is the effect of saying not the three woodcutters or the three tree cutters, but calling them the three or the two, sorry, executioners? What does it make us think that the tree is? It makes us feel what? Yes, Hayden.
Sympathy for the tree?
It certainly does. But what does it actually make us think the tree is if you say that the men are executioners? Olivia Gann.
It makes me feel that like the tree is human.
That's correct. That's what I wanted to hear. Basically, what it does is it has the effect of personifying the tree, doesn't it? It personifies the tree by saying that the tree men, the loggers, woodsmen, there are many different terms here, but whichever, these men cutting down the tree are described as executioners, which means that we're supposed to think of the tree as a human thing. So it is what we would call an implied personification. Now, if you imply something, it means you suggest that. It means you don't say it directly. For example, if I said to you, well, Peter really likes his food, what could I be implying about Peter? I could be implying that he's rather greedy, or he's a little bit overweight, maybe. Do you understand? Because I'm saying that he's eating a lot, really. I'm implying, I'm not saying it loudly and openly. All right, now, so the poem starts on a very dramatic note. The two executioners, and it makes us feel sympathy for the tree immediately because we feel it's like a human being. So they stalk along the knolls. Now, stalk is a verb, right? They stalk. What is stalking? If you stalk, what do you do, Hayden?
I think that you go around and look into some people's business.
Fair enough. In a kind of way, I think that there is some truth in that. But as a verb, it basically means something like to hunt down. If you stalk some animal in the jungle or forest, you're hunting it. You could say that a tiger stalks its prey. Do you understand? So to stalk is another clever use of language to make us feel something. It's like the men are hunters trying to find the tree they're going to kill. Do you understand me? And so it's what I'm trying to get you to look at is the clever use of language, particular word choice, to create a very powerful and strong feeling and meaning in the poem. The executioners stalk over the knolls. It would be much different if they said they strolled over the knolls. By the way, a knoll is kind of like a gentle hill, like a hump in the earth where the ground rises in a small mound or little hill. So if you think about it, it would be a very different line if it simply said the woodsman walked along over the knolls. Then it wouldn't have any of those very powerfully charged words. It's like those words are charged with electricity, and the electricity is emotion. Do you get it, everyone? So if the writer, the poet, had simply said, the two woodsmen walked along over the hills, it wouldn't have any of those powerful feelings we've just said, would it? The two words create a lot of difference in the effect. So they're carrying two axes. Now, you can see that line 2 has got a technique that you already know. In fact, there's two. Can you pick any out in line 2? Any techniques? Olivia, your hand is up first.
Alliteration.
Well done. And tell us where the example is in line 2, Olivia. Read it out.
Heavy heads.
That's right. Heavy heads. So obviously it means these axes are big and very powerful axes ready to chop. Shining and wide. Now that also contains a technique too. Does anyone know what it is? Shining and wide? Mary?
Something like that.
Well, good try. You're getting close. I know what you want to say, but you've got another word that begins with the same letter, but it's not the one you want. What do you think it is, Jack?
It is golden right to someone, and it is what like it is the same meaning as big.
Yes, that's right. Those are good definitions of those words. So what do you think of the technique then, Hayden?
Assonance.
Well done, Hayden. It's assonance. Now, Holiday, can you remember assonance? You remember that particular technique that we've said a few times? Good girl, I'm glad. How about Hayden's identified it? Can anyone remember what it is? Assonance. Well, it is the repetition of vowel sounds in a sequence of words. So it's a repetition of vowel sounds in a sequence of words. Now, in this case, which vowel is being repeated? Hannah.
The I.
Yeah, the I of shining and wide. Now, these two techniques, all they do is this. They draw our attention to the words that are linked by the sounds in the two different sound techniques. So the alliteration links the H's of heavy heads. And by doing that, it just focuses our attention a little bit more closely on what is being described using the technique. And in this case, it focuses on these axe heads being big, heavy axe heads that are going to be capable of chopping into even a big tree. And shining and wide. You know, these vowel sounds, they open up. They're not like, if you use the vowel sound in the word hit, can you hear the I? It's short and sharp. Do you understand? It's a very closed vowel, hit, not wide, where it opens up. And so these vowels draw our attention to the words that are joined by the technique of assonance. And so if you look at that second line, nearly all of it, in fact, really all of it, is dedicated to one single thing, making us visualize the axes. They've got these big, really kind of bright, shining metal axes ready to do the job, the executioner's job. And by the way, axes cleverly also adds to the word executioners, because in the olden days, that was one way they used to execute people, isn't it? They used to chop their head off with an axe. And so it's really continuing the idea of executing a person. You understand? The word executioner and axe together makes us feel that someone is going to be killed. But it's not, it's tree. But even so, we feel sympathy, like one of you said earlier on. Who said it makes us feel sympathy for the tree? Can you remember who it was? Well, yes, Mary?
Like, can I go to the bathroom?
Yes, please go ahead, dear. Now we're into the third line. And a limp two-handled saw, toothed for cutting great bowls. Now, a bowl, by the way, you should take down everything that's new. Are you taking it down, Logan, all the new words? Are you writing down all the new words that you can see in the chat there on the right-hand side? Are you doing that, Logan? I hope you are, because I want you to learn and get all sorts of new words to add to your expression. Now, a bowl, in this case, is basically the trunk of a tree. And so, in this case, they've got this. Have you ever seen those in pictures, those very, very long saws, where one man has one handle and the other man has the other handle, and they both start sawing the tree on either side? Yeah, it's a huge, long saw. It's actually as tall as a man or even taller. So they used to do it that way in the olden days before they developed machine saws. So they've come with their weapons, haven't they? Now we're into the fourth line. And so they approach the proud tree that bears the death mark on its side. Now, I noticed that some of you referred to the death mark. Who was that? Was that you, Lambert? You referred to the death mark, or Wesley? Yes. Now, in this case, does anyone know what that means? What it's referring to? Well, I don't know if you've ever seen this when you've been walking around the neighborhood or in a park. Have you ever seen a tree with a bit of a color painted on it, like a mark, like an X painted on it, sometimes in yellow or white paint? So Lambert, you have you? Yes. And this means that tree is
Sometimes.
Sorry, could you say that, Lambert, again?
I said sometimes I see it.
Yes. And normally that means that tree is going to be cut down by the local council. We don't necessarily know why, but they can sometimes do it because the tree might be rotten. It might have a disease in it. And there could be other reasons as well. I don't know about you, but have you ever heard the sound of trees being cut down in your neighborhood, and then you know, those electric saws that they call them chainsaws buzzing away, and then they feed the branches into that big mulching giant machine that chops it up into fine chips of wood. Have you ever seen or heard that? It happens all the time, you know. I always feel a bit distressed, to be honest with you, a bit sad to hear that. Every time a tree gets chopped down, it seems to me a very sad thing. Yes, Wesley?
So I haven't actually seen a real one, but I've seen a picture of one of those things which have to be feeding a lot of grass.
Okay, good. All right. Now, just as we finish that first stanza, we've already talked about death mark, which, by the way, is another strong word because we don't normally associate the word death with the cutting down of a tree, do we? We just say cutting it down, chopping it down. We don't say death. And again, that's the third word in this stanza that adds to this pattern of words which suggest killing a tree, not chopping it down. Now, if you add those words together, have a look. You've got executioner, you've got axe, you've got death, and then you've even got the word proud in line 4. And all of those words together make the tree seem to be a living thing, a human thing that's about to be killed, doesn't it? Now, this is a technique, a rather difficult one. It's called a lexical chain. Now, a lexical chain, are you writing that down? I've put it there in the chat for you. It's like a chain. You know, a chain is full of little links joining together to make the whole chain. And it's like the words are linked together, all 4 of them. And they help to add to the idea that the tree is a human and about to be killed or executed. Okay. By the way, in that first stanza, apart from all the techniques we've picked up, there's 1 or 2 others you could mention. Can anyone pick out another technique at all? Maybe 2, if possible. Have a quick look and see if there are any other techniques in the first stanza. Only in the first stanza, remember. Think about it. Okay, and when your hand's up, have you got a technique for me?
Personification.
Well, we have mentioned that, but where are you talking about? Are you talking about another example?
A proud tree.
But we already said that one. I want something we haven't mentioned, a new one. How about enjambement? Do you remember that one? Hands up if you can remember enjambement. And what's the other way of pronouncing that word, Hannah?
Enjambment.
Good girl, enjambment. And what does it mean, Hannah? Do you remember?
No.
No, okay, don't worry. At least you remembered, didn't you? Which is a good thing. All right, then let's hear from Olivia Sue. What does it mean?
Is where in a poetry a line runs on to the next without pause.
That's right. A line runs on into the next without pause. I'll put that in the chat just to remind you. That's enjambement. Okay, everyone? It can also be pronounced enjambment, as I said. And so it occurs, doesn't it, at the end of line 4 into line 5. That's enjambement. By the way, I think what happens here is this. If it runs on without stopping, it means it's something that is going to definitely happen. It's like it moves relentlessly. That means without any way of stopping it, it continues to its goal. And that's what these woodsmen are doing, aren't they? They're continuing to their goal without anything stopping them to ultimately cut down the tree. So I think the enjambement here cleverly suggests this, the inevitable fate of the tree, the inevitable fate of the tree. I'm putting that in the chat too for you. It means that you would say this, just as the enjambement makes the line run on uninterrupted, so the men with their axes are moving uninterruptedly towards their goal of chopping down the tree. So that's how you explain the use of enjambement there. All right, so one more technique from Hayden, yes?
Polysyndeton.
Yes, tell me where.
And a limb two-handed saw tooth for cutting great balls, and
You can even mention the one that's in line 2. So there's several of these conjunctions, the word and that's worth noticing too. Now, remember that polysyndeton was what, Raymond? What polysyndeton again? Raymond, can you remember?
A polysyndeton is a repeating a word 3 times.
Well, you're very close. It's very close. Not quite there yet, but we are close. Hanwen, what about you?
It is when you use 2 or more conjunctions to describe all.
Yes,
Word.
particularly within a sentence. So in that first stanza, did you notice that it's actually a single sentence? It's 4 and a bit lines, and it's just one sentence. So it does make use of polysyndeton. And I think this, the repetition of and, it's building up the sense of, again, the tension that this action of cutting down the tree is relentless. Now, that word I've used a few times. I do want you to know what it means. Anyone know? Relentless. It means something that cannot be stopped. It's insistent. It's persistent. It continues without anyone being able to stop it. And so in this case, it's like saying, and they're coming, and this is what they've got, an axe, and this all, and they're approaching. It's like it's building up the sense of tension and inevitability. Now, what does that word mean? I've used that word today too, inevitable. If something's inevitable, what does it mean? It means it's unavoidable. It can't be stopped. So that's how those techniques work. The enjambement coupled with the polysyndeton build up this feeling of tension, plus they create a feeling of something inevitable, something that is a continuous action that cannot be stopped. Okay, there's one more technique. How about rhyme? Knolls and bowls and wide and side. Did you notice that? By the way, this rhyming occurs not in successive lines. Now, successive means one line after the other. It occurs in alternating lines. So it's line 1 and then not line 2, but yes in line 3. And then line 2, you have to wait until you get to the end, until you come across the word side. So yes, you know, it's got quite a few things going for it, this poem already, don't you think? If we were to add up all the techniques, there's personification, there's alliteration, there's assonance, there's enjambement, there's rhyme, there's polysyndeton. Goodness, there's an awful lot, wouldn't you say?